Hi, I'm Catherine Morrison. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a family law attorney in Chicago. The irony of my profession isn't lost on me. I've spent the last 8 years helping other people navigate divorces while my own marriage slowly crumbled. I've been married to Michael Morrison for 10 years. We met in law school, where he was charming, ambitious, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We built what looked like the perfect life together: a beautiful house in Lincoln Park, successful careers, the kind of marriage that made other couples envious. But what I'm about to tell you happened at his mother's funeral, of all places. It was there, standing beside his casket, that I discovered my husband had been having an affair. And it was there that I made a decision that would change both of our lives forever. Some people might say it was heartless to start planning a divorce at a funeral. But when you hear your husband whispering sweet words about another woman while his mother lies dead in front of you, something inside you breaks and then hardens into pure steel. This is the story of how one whispered confession at a funeral became the catalyst for the most strategic divorce I've ever orchestrated. And trust me, as a family law attorney, I know how to play to win. Michael and I met during our second year at Northwestern Law. He was in my constitutional law class, always sitting in the front row, always prepared with thoughtful questions that impressed our professor. I was immediately attracted to his intelligence and his confidence. I came from a working-class family in Milwaukee, where my parents had sacrificed everything to send me to law school. My father worked double shifts at the paper mill. My mother cleaned houses on weekends, all so I could have the opportunities they never had. Michael, on the other hand, came from old Chicago money. His father was a federal judge. His mother's family owned real estate throughout the city. Despite our different backgrounds, we connected intellectually. Our courtship was intellectual and intense. We would study together, debate legal cases over coffee, challenge each other's arguments. Michael made me feel like I had found my intellectual equal, someone who could match my ambition and drive. We graduated together, both landing positions at prestigious Chicago firms. Michael went into corporate law. I chose family law. We got married 2 years later in a beautiful ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden, surrounded by law school friends and proud parents. The first few years of marriage were genuinely happy. We were both building our careers, working long hours, but we shared the same goals and values. We bought our house in Lincoln Park, a gorgeous Victorian that we spent weekends renovating together. We traveled, we entertained, we looked like the perfect power couple. But somewhere around year 5, things started to shift. Michael became more distant, more critical. He would make subtle digs about my work. Family law is so emotional, Catherine. It's not real law like corporate work. He would dismiss my opinions during dinner parties. Catherine always gets too worked up about these social justice issues. His mother, Eleanor, had never particularly liked me. She thought I was too independent, too focused on my career. A wife should support her husband's ambitions, she would say pointedly during family dinners. Michael needs a woman who puts him first. Eleanor lived alone in the family home in Evanston after Michael's father died 5 years ago. She was demanding, manipulative, and constantly interfering in our marriage. Every Sunday dinner at her house was an exercise in endurance, with Eleanor making passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, my clothes, my inability to give her grandchildren. Michael never defended me. In fact, over the years, he started echoing his mother's criticisms. Maybe Mom has a point about you working so much. Other wives seem more supportive of their husbands' careers. Eleanor died on a Tuesday morning from a sudden heart attack. Despite our complicated relationship, I felt genuine sadness. She was Michael's mother, and I knew he was devastated. I immediately took time off work to help with funeral arrangements to support my husband through his grief. The funeral was held on Friday at St. Vincent de Paul Catholic Church in Evanston. It was a beautiful service, well attended by Eleanor's many friends and our extended family. Michael delivered a touching eulogy about his mother's strength, her devotion to family, her unwavering faith. I sat in the front pew, holding Michael's hand, playing the role of the supportive wife. After the service, we moved to the cemetery for the burial. It was a gray, overcast day, typical for Chicago in November. As we stood around Eleanor's grave, listening to the priest's final words, I noticed Michael seemed distracted. He kept checking his phone, glancing around nervously. I assumed it was grief. People process loss differently. After the burial, we returned to Eleanor's house for a reception. The house was filled with family friends, neighbors, distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. I spent the afternoon playing hostess, accepting condolences, making sure everyone had food and drinks. Around 4 p.m., I noticed Michael had disappeared. I searched the house and finally found him in Eleanor's study, on the phone. His voice was low, intimate, completely different from the grieving son he had been all day. I stood in the doorway, hidden by the partially closed door, and listened. He was saying, "I know, baby. I wish you could have been here today. Mom would have loved you." My blood ran cold. Baby? Who was he talking to? Michael continued, "She doesn't judge me like Catherine does. With you, I can just be myself. I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not." I felt like I had been slapped. My husband was having an emotional conversation with another woman at his mother's funeral, comparing her favorably to me. "I can't wait to see you tonight," he whispered. "This whole day has been so hard, but knowing you're waiting for me makes it bearable." That's when I knew. This wasn't just an emotional affair. This was a full relationship. Michael was planning to see this woman tonight, on the day we buried his mother. I quietly backed away from the study and returned to the reception, my mind racing. I needed to process what I had just heard, but I also needed to maintain my composure. There were still dozens of people in the house, and I couldn't fall apart in public. 20 minutes later, Michael emerged from the study, his phone nowhere to be seen. He approached me with a sad smile, playing the grieving son again. "Sorry, honey," he said, putting his arm around my waist. "I needed a moment alone. This day has been so overwhelming." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This man I had been married to for 10 years, who I thought I knew completely, was living a double life, and he was good at it. If I hadn't overheard that phone call, I never would have suspected anything. "Of course," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Take all the time you need." As the afternoon wore on, more people approached us to offer condolences. I watched Michael interact with family and friends, playing the perfect grieving son and devoted husband. He was convincing, touching my hand, including me in conversations, presenting us as a united couple facing loss together. But I saw through it now. Every gesture felt calculated, every smile felt fake. Around 6 p.m., as the reception was winding down, Michael and I stood together by Eleanor's casket for a final goodbye. The funeral director had reopened it for family members who wanted one last moment with her. As we stood there, side by side, Michael leaned close to me. I thought he was going to say something about his mother, about how much he would miss her, about how grateful he was for my support during this difficult time. Instead, he whispered, "She doesn't judge me." At first I thought he was talking about his mother, but then he continued, so quietly that only I could hear him. "With Jessica, I can be who I really am. She doesn't judge me like you do." Jessica. Now I had a name. Michael thought he was sharing a private moment of grief with me, perhaps explaining his emotional distance as some kind of philosophical reflection on his mother's unconditional love. He had no idea that I had overheard his phone call, that I knew exactly who he was talking about. I looked at him, this man who was confessing his affair at his mother's funeral, and felt something inside me crystallize into pure determination. I leaned close to him, matching his intimate whisper, and said, "Neither will the court." Michael's face went white. He stared at me for a long moment, trying to process what I had just said. But before he could respond, the funeral director approached us to discuss closing the casket and final arrangements. For the rest of the evening, Michael was visibly shaken. He kept glancing at me nervously, trying to gauge how much I knew, what I intended to do. But I gave him nothing. I continued playing the supportive wife, helping clean up after the reception, thanking guests for coming, discussing plans for settling Eleanor's estate. That night, Michael claimed he needed to go back to his office to catch up on work that had piled up while he was dealing with funeral arrangements. Of course, he was going to see Jessica. "Take all the time you need," I told him sweetly. "I know how important your work is." As soon as Michael left, I opened my laptop and got to work. Being a family law attorney has its advantages. I know exactly how to investigate a cheating spouse, and I know what evidence will hold up in court. First, I checked our phone records online. Michael had been very careful to delete calls and texts from his phone, but the phone company keeps detailed records. There it was, dozens of calls to the same number over the past 6 months, often lasting an hour or more. The calls were frequent, intimate in their timing, late at night, early in the morning, during lunch breaks. I ran the number through a reverse lookup service. Jessica Chen, 28 years old, marketing coordinator at Michael's law firm. Of course, the classic office affair. Next, I checked our credit card statements and bank records. Michael had been very sloppy here. Expensive dinners at romantic restaurants, hotel charges during days when he claimed to be working late, jewelry purchases from Tiffany that I had never received. The most damning evidence was a charge from 2 months ago, a weekend getaway to a spa resort in Wisconsin. The same weekend Michael told me he had to work on an important merger and couldn't join me at my sister's wedding. By 2 a.m., I had built a comprehensive timeline of Michael's affair. It had been going on for at least 8 months, possibly longer. The financial evidence alone would be devastating in divorce proceedings. Over the next week, while Michael dealt with his mother's estate and continued his affair, I planned my strategy. As a family law attorney, I had certain advantages that most betrayed spouses don't have. I knew the law, I knew the system, and I knew how to play to win. First, I quietly consulted with colleagues about the best divorce attorneys in Chicago, attorneys I hadn't worked with who wouldn't have a conflict of interest. I settled on Patricia Hawkins, a formidable woman known for her aggressive representation of betrayed spouses. Patricia was expensive, ruthless, and exactly what I needed. Next, I gathered more evidence. I hired a private investigator, someone I had worked with on custody cases, to document Michael's affair. Within 3 days, I had photographs of Michael and Jessica together at restaurants, entering hotels, walking hand in hand through Millennium Park. The most valuable piece of evidence came from Michael's laptop. He had been careless about security, using the same password for everything. I found months of email exchanges between him and Jessica, including detailed discussions about their future together. In one particularly damning email, Michael wrote, "I can't wait until I can divorce Catherine and we can be together openly. She's become so cold and judgmental. You understand me in ways she never has." Jessica's response was equally revealing. "I hate that you have to go home to her every night. You deserve someone who appreciates you. Maybe it's time to tell her about us." These emails proved that this wasn't just a physical affair. This was an emotional relationship with plans for a future together. In Illinois, this kind of evidence could significantly impact the division of assets and potential alimony. 2 weeks after Eleanor's funeral, I was ready to move. I had gathered all the evidence I needed, retained my attorney, and prepared for every possible response Michael might have. I chose to confront him on a Thursday evening. Michael came home from work in a good mood, humming to himself as he hung up his coat. He had no idea what was coming. "We need to talk," I said, setting a thick folder on the dining room table. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted," Michael replied, not even looking at the folder. "No, it can't wait. Sit down." Something in my tone made Michael look at me sharply. He sat down across from me, his eyes fixed on the folder. "I know about Jessica," I said simply. Michael's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, denial, calculation, and finally, resignation. "Catherine, Don't," I interrupted. "Just don't. I have phone records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, photographs, and emails. I know everything." I opened the folder and spread the evidence across the table like playing cards. Michael stared at the photographs of him and Jessica, his face growing paler with each image. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Since your mother's funeral, when you whispered to me about how Jessica doesn't judge you. That was quite a confession to make over your mother's casket." He winced. "Catherine, please, we can work this out. I made a mistake, but—" "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly. "Michael, you've been planning a future with another woman. You've been lying to me for months, spending our money on your girlfriend and apparently telling everyone at your firm that you're going to divorce me. This isn't a mistake. This is a calculated betrayal." I pulled out one more document, divorce papers. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning. You can contest it if you want, but with this evidence, I don't recommend it." Michael stared at the papers, then at me. "You're really going to destroy our marriage over this?" "I'm not destroying anything, Michael. You already did that." The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. Michael's attorney advised him not to contest the filing, given the overwhelming evidence of his affair. In Illinois, while adultery doesn't automatically guarantee a favorable settlement, it can influence the division of assets, especially when there's evidence of financial misconduct, which there was. Patricia Hawkins was everything I had hoped for. She presented our evidence methodically, demonstrating not just the affair but the financial impact of Michael's betrayal. Every romantic dinner, every hotel room, every piece of jewelry he had bought Jessica had been paid for with marital assets. Michael was ordered to pay me significant alimony, and I received 65% of our marital assets, including the house in Lincoln Park. The judge was particularly unimpressed with Michael's argument that he deserved equal treatment because these things happen in marriages. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said sternly, "these things don't just happen. They are choices, and choices have consequences." The most satisfying moment came when Michael's law firm learned about the affair. Dating a subordinate employee violated firm policy, and the public nature of our divorce, including the evidence of financial misconduct, reflected poorly on the firm's reputation. Michael was asked to resign. Jessica, meanwhile, was transferred to another department and given a clear message that her career advancement at the firm was limited. Their relationship didn't survive the scandal and Michael's financial losses. Apparently, Jessica wasn't interested in a broke, unemployed lawyer with a reputation for cheating. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Michael at a downtown Starbucks. He looked tired, older, defeated. He was working at a smaller firm for a significantly less money, struggling to rebuild his career. "Catherine," he said awkwardly, "how are you?" "I'm excellent, thank you," I replied, and I meant it. My career had flourished since the divorce. The high-profile nature of my case, a family law attorney successfully divorcing her cheating husband, had brought me significant attention in legal circles. I'd been featured in Chicago Lawyer magazine and invited to speak at conferences about strategic divorce planning. I had also started dating again. His name is Robert, and he's a federal judge I met at a legal conference. He's kind, honest, and values integrity above all else. We take our time with everything, building trust slowly, learning from past mistakes. "I heard you're doing well. The new practice, the speaking engagements, that's great." "Yes. It turns out that being judged by a court was much more favorable than being judged by Jessica," I replied with a smile. Michael winced. "Catherine, Michael, we don't need to rehash this. You made your choice at your mother's funeral. I made mine. We're both living with the consequences. As I walked away, I reflected on how that one whispered confession had changed everything. Michael thought he was sharing an intimate moment about his emotional needs. What he was actually doing was handing me the keys to his destruction. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael had spent years criticizing my judgmental nature, claiming I was too harsh, too demanding, too focused on right and wrong. But in the end, it wasn't my judgment that destroyed him. It was the court's judgment, based on the evidence of his own choices. I had learned something valuable through this experience. Sometimes being judgmental is actually being discerning. Sometimes having high standards isn't a flaw, it's a strength. Michael wanted a woman who wouldn't judge his lies, his betrayals, his moral compromises. He found that in Jessica, but he also found his downfall. Sometimes the truth comes out in the most unexpected places. For us, it happened over a casket, in a moment when Michael thought he was safe to reveal his true feelings. He was wrong about that, just as he had been wrong about so many things. His mother's funeral became the beginning of the end of our marriage, but for me, it was also the beginning of a new life, one where I'm valued, respected, and finally free from judgment of my own. If this story shocked you, just wait for what's next. Leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and of course, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a single notification.